William Shakespeare once said that the eyes are the window to the soul. Hi, my name is Alya and I'm so glad you stopped by. Today we're going to be talking about why so many cultures have this idea that the eyes are the window to the soul. Is there any truth to it? So stick around and we'll explore it together. So this is really exciting because I love exploring the origins of expressions anyway. Back in the day, I even did a whole subject at school on linguistics and expressions and idioms, things like that. So this is really something that is always been fascinating to me, but this is a really interesting expression, and I really wanted to learn more about it and share it with you guys. So I've done a little bit of research, and also just from what I understand about the eyes, which is a fair amount doing what I do for work, I have put some ideas together. But one thing that I researched the most, I think, is about communication, because if we break it down, what is the soul? So for me, the soul is a life force. It is the light, the spark that we were given, not just to be alive, but to be living and present and connected to one another. It is that sort of X factor, if you like, about somebody that really either draws you to them or makes you notice them or puts them in your path at the right time, all that kind of thing. So to me, that's really soul driven in a sense, because that, again, to me, is how we are divinely connected. But to make it a bit more scientific, if you will, there has been a study that I found online led by Dr. Now I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, Mehrabian. He actually described the percentages of the different types or different forms of communication. He was able to break it down and really sort of scientifically demonstrate that 7%, only 7% of our communication is verbal. And you know, when you talk to your kids especially, that's something you would notice, because they don't hear a lot of what is said. But also, if you think about it, it's not about what you say or even how you say it. It's when you say it. It's how the moment is, you know, the concentration, the eye contact. So there's that big connection there. Concentration, all that sort of thing plays a huge amount. So the actual verbal component is relatively small, and that makes a lot of sense. But 38% is vocal. So sounds, intonations, you know, how loud you are, all that sort of thing. Environment would probably play a huge role in that as well. Conclusion was that 93% of all communication was non-verbal. So other than that 7% that is purely spoken, the rest is not. So what makes up the largest proportion? You've got it. It's visual. So eye contact isn't just the only thing that falls into that, at least in my interpretation. It's also what we are gathering around us, the information that we're gathering around us at the time. Now, what the eyes do, aside from what we're actually focused on and looking at, like for example, right now, I'm in an office, I've got a lot of things around me, obviously focusing on the notes I've prepared and focusing on the viewfinder. But at the same time, I am aware of the weather outside. I am aware of the lighting. I'm aware of what my dog's doing. I'm aware of the things in my space, but also not just immediate, the greater space. And that's really important to consider when you're talking about all of the things that our eyes are absorbing. And a lot of the things that we absorb, we don't actually consciously notice. And that's why it's very difficult to understand or appreciate how much the eyes are actually doing. For example, our peripheral vision goes all the way out to around about, I'm going to call it 200 degrees because I just want to average it out. But we only really are aware of about 140, 120 degrees on an ongoing basis, unless something really triggers our concentration or really distracts our view. Say a flashing light, for example, or sometimes it might be a sound that actually causes us to change our fixation. But the eyes are extremely capable. You know, think of hunters and gatherers. You would have been, you know, more likely to survive if you saw something coming out from behind you. Same thing goes for driving. You're much likely to be a safer driver if you're aware of things that are not quite in your blind spot, because it's called a blind spot for a reason, but just short of that blind spot, you know, all the way out to it. And the less you are aware, the bigger that blind spot becomes, the more dangerous the situation becomes for you in a maneuver. So to me, that probably is a lot of how that it's not a myth how a lot of that perception or that idea of the eyes being the window to your true self came to be. If the eyes are so pivotal to the way we interact with each other, and if we can connect it back to the idea that our souls or our being or our essence is how we interact with one another, then how could the two be independent? They have to be at least overlapping, if not somewhat the same. The other thing that's really, really interesting is that the eyes, and especially the visible part of the eyes, the iris, the pupil, has both a sympathetic and a parasympathetic response. So there is an eye reaction or a visible reaction in the eyes, whether you're fight or flight, so you're scared and you're about to survive, go into survival mode, or if you're rest and digest. If you're chill, you're tired, you probably had a big meal or a few drinks, the eyes have a response that's very visible to anybody, whether you're on one or the other. So that's an interesting thing to consider. So if someone's really scared or really anxious or perhaps just stressed or running around or somehow very, very active in a sort of stressed state, not necessarily an emotional stress, but just, really getting things done, that is going to be visible in their pupil reaction, in the size of their iris aperture. Because the iris is actually 2 rings of muscles. One relaxes when needed, and the other one constricts when needed, and that is what changes the pupil size. So when you the opposite, when you're really relaxed and you're just lounging around, lucky for some that they get to do that, but even if you're about to fall asleep or if you've just woken up, that sort of daisy time, or that if you ever just happen to have a moment to yourself, your eyes will also show that. The other thing that's really, really unique is the eye movements. A lot of our expression, and I'm sure you would notice that as I speak to you, a lot of our expression is in our eye muscles. Not only do we have 6 muscles that control our eye movements, which allow it to, go the whole way around, to make eye contact, to do that cheeky glance away, to even the way the cheek muscles and the facial muscles affect the eyes as well. So if you smile, a lot of people, especially with a higher cheekbone, might end up squinting a little bit with a smile. All those types of things really communicate the way somebody is feeling. It's that, very few people have a poker face. Most people have a fairly expressive face. The other thing is our brains are trained to see faces. It's a primordial thing. It's not like you're trained throughout your lifetime or anything. It's not like you can teach yourself to not be that way. It is something that the brain is deeply, deeply ingrained to do. That's how we recognize one another. It's a huge survival component. This is how a baby comes to recognize his parents' faces, all that sort of thing. And that's probably why we tend to see a man on the moon, or why we tend to see faces in tree patterns or in floorboards, things like that. It's because the way the eyes scan a space tends to be this little area here. And that's a huge component in, say, autism or disorders like that, where the brain is actually not so able to scan the face in the correct kind of pattern. And because of that, emotions are often misread or miscommunicated or completely misunderstood. So the fact that we're able to do that, and the fact that our face has something to read, so not only are we programmed to read it, but there is something to read, is a huge part of how we interconnect with each other and communicate. It's not really so far-fetched that in many traditions, the eye represents the window of the soul. This means that our immediate emotions, our fears, our different states are completely represented not only by our eyes, but also what our eyes are receiving. So it's not just the eye, the soul and the window of the person that you're looking at, but it's also you and what your soul and what your window is absorbing. That's a huge component. I think I would like to say almost a bigger component, because it's not just what is being shown to you and what is being reflected out in the iris response, in the eye movements, in the facial expressions, but also what your soul is receiving. And I think that's actually a big moment that needs a pause, that what your eyes are interpreting or what your eyes are absorbing will also really strongly impact on you and your soul. You hear a lot of people talk about energy and talk about, all that sort of luck and things like that. But the reality is that a lot of it can be explained with just purely, chemicals, hormones, and experiences. So it could be said that what your soul is absorbing visually or what your spirit is absorbing visually, is also really strongly impacted, not just by what you're looking at, but also how you're seeing it. And that is something that all of us can have some control or some impact on and work on, and see more light in someone's expression, or see the good in someone's interaction with somebody, or not even necessarily the good, but what good can be taken from that interaction. Is there something you can do for that person? Is there something they can do for you? Is there something to be learnt from a situation? Not all bad interactions have to be bad, and not all good interactions have to be simple. There's always something deeper there, and you only have to look into someone's eyes to see what that might be. There's also this idea of look me in the eyes. Eye contact is such a strong and powerful tool, but it's also a hugely cultural significant tool. A lot of the rules around some cultures is that you're not allowed to look someone in the eye, because that could be rude. Or it could be the other thing. If you don't look someone in the eye, that might be rude. So knowing the cultural significance of eye contact can be extremely impactful. It can really offend someone. It can make someone extremely uncomfortable, or making or not making the eye contact at the correct time can have that result. So just knowing that draws again the idea that how impactful, how important those eyes are and that gaze is. Even right now, the fact that I'm speaking directly to you, reality is I'm talking to a plastic box, but on the receiving end, I'm communicating with you guys by looking directly at you. And I hope that when you're watching this, I like to imagine that I'm being looked directly back at as well, and some sort of exchange, some sort of a communication is taking place. The other thing I really wanted to mention is how unique an eye is. I mean, it's mind-blowing how beautifully individual an eye is. Your iris, and right and left will be independent, is extremely, extremely unique. There is not one iris like another. There may actually be fingerprints that are harder to distinguish from one another. They're all unique. I think the more that technology improves, the more we realize that there aren't two fingerprints alike, but it can be similar enough where it's confused. Whereas an iris, there is no iris like another iris. There is no brown like another brown. There is no blue like another blue. They look similar enough to the naked eye where it might be difficult to tell a difference, or families will have similar, very, very similar shades of their eye color. But the reality is the component of pigment is very unique to that eye, and no two eyes or no two irises are going to ever be alike. And what's more is they change depending on how much light there is, depending how stressed the person is or how relaxed the person is. So it can also alter based on the pupil aperture. More than that, more unique than an iris, more unique than that fingerprint, is of course the retina. Now the retina, unfortunately, the one thing about the retina is it does change over time. Of course it does, because it's a set of nerves and vessel layers that are very uniquely intertwined and interconnected, so they're also quite vulnerable to change over a lifespan. However, one of the things I do on a daily basis for work is take photographs of the very central sort of 40 degrees of someone's eye, which is the macula, their optic nerve, and the immediate vessels that are connected. And I have to say, and this is something just yesterday I noticed, over the course of, say, I think it was about 9 years, this one particular lady, her fundus, or central retina, has changed significantly, to the point where I actually went back to see the progression of change to make sure it's the same person. I mean, that's how significant the change had been due to disease. I mean, there was an explanation as to why that was happening, but the reality is that not only is the retina extremely unique, the way every artery is placed, the way every vein is placed, the way the layers are interconnected, the way they are spread out, so the way the anatomy actually lies, the size of the eye, the depth of the nerve, the placement of the nerve head. And once you go deeper in the layers, the way those layers are interconnected, the thicknesses of those layers, the particular artifacts in those layers, all those things are so unique that it's got to the point where we use that uniqueness, we measure those particular relationships and sizes in order to diagnose and treat and follow and manage disease. And there is no way you can confuse one eye for the other. There's just no way, or for any other. There's just no way. If such a thing was to happen that, let's say you know, at the end of the day, it's software, and you open a patient's file in order to create a new photograph or a new measurement, and you happen to accidentally photograph someone's eye under somebody else's file, you will immediately, I mean, you don't even have to be trained, you will immediately know that that is not the right person. There is just, you know, it's like looking at two different faces. I mean, it's that significant. You will definitely notice that there is, you know, it's just somebody else. You'll just definitely notice. And even though we don't see the retina like we do the iris, I do still feel that because it's so unique, it must impact the way a person uses their eyes. It does in a sense of sensory function, but it must also affect them as they perceive the world. It's just that one person can't appreciate another person's perception. There's no way to demonstrate that. But if you can imagine when one director directs your favorite TV show and then the next week it's a different director, and there are those subtle differences, you're still watching the same show, it's still following on the same storyline, the similar writers, actors, all that sort of thing, but there's just a slight dissimilarity in the cinematography or the approach or the camera angle or amount of graphics or the amount of special effects, all that sort of stuff. That's the difference. To me anyway, that's the way I interpret the difference between the way I perceive the world, let's say, and somebody else. And that's true of the directors. The way they perceive the storyline to the next director, the way they want to relay that to the world may differ in that slight way. And you can probably relate people's perceptions or differences in perceptions in the same way. The difference is that they're also using a different camera. This has been such an interesting topic, you guys. I don't know, I could talk for hours about this, but I'm going to wrap it up because it's just so extremely fascinating, and just the rabbit hole I went down looking up this particular topic was a little deep. I had to pull myself out. And I had to remind myself at the end of the day that I am an orthoptist and I study the eyes from the perspective of medicine, from the perspective of disease. And I had to pull myself out of the whole energy, etc., cultural rabbit hole. But I don't dismiss it for 1 second. I completely appreciate that there is a connection and there is a reason. That's the most metabolic part of our body, the most communicative part of our body, is also the one that holds the most significance culturally and in our daily lives. For more of these extremely interesting topics and videos, I highly, highly recommend you subscribe. Please go ahead and hit that button. I love seeing this channel grow as it inspires me to keep going and finding new interesting things to tell you guys about. Leave me a comment, ask me questions, suggest topics. I'm happy to hear your suggestions as well. So definitely do that. And for more daily things and cute doggies and so forth, please head over to Instagram and follow me there. Wherever you are around the world, my lovelies, I hope you're having a tremendously wonderful day, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye!